Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. You might have noticed that I slowed down the amount of scripted videos on my channel. There's a good reason for that, but it won't be relevant for this video. Today, I'm going to talk about my experience with Hololive games running on Linux. You know, back in 2022, one of the main things that actually compelled me to get a gaming PC was being able to play Hololive Error, which at the time was still a demo, and the only computer I had was my good old laptop that frankly wasn't up to par to run that game. But when I actually got a gaming PC around February of 2022, my initial experience running Windows 11 was so shit. Sluggishness all throughout, issues with drivers, I couldn't get RPCS 3 to run without crashing, which till this day I still have no idea what exactly was causing that. After dealing with that nonsense all at once, I thought to myself, you know what, I've been using this operating system for too long, it's not getting any better, fuck this, I want to run something else on my computer. Then I installed Ubuntu, and then later Manjaro, and then later Arch Linux. Now, I still have fond memories of the Hololive Error demo crashing mid-game, and I had to install wine staging in order for the game to work properly. Out of curiosity, I did revisit this game just for this video, and I have noticed some issues. For one, using WineGE tanks the performance pretty hard, so I have to use Lucha's F-Shack, which does improve the performance quite a lot, although I will say that this is a pretty unoptimized game. Like, I get almost 3 times the frames in the final build of the game, or more accurately, the first paid release build that has the frame rate unlocked. I say this because if you play the game on Steam, the frame rate is locked to 60, which isn't the biggest deal in the world, but for someone like me who has a capable PC and a monitor with a high refresh rate, I actually choose to play the initial build. Although my graphics card is powerful enough to render the game at 300 plus frames per second at 1080p, and since I have a 165Hz monitor, it actually goes above my targeted refresh rate. In a situation like this, what I do is I use this program called Mango HUD, which is an overlay software, and I added an extra environmental variable through the Mango HUD config that forces the game to enable VSync. Just like that, the game is mostly locked to 165 FPS, with the exception of a few GPU demanding moments, and I like this experience. I actually made a video talking about some of the initial hurdles that I went through with this game when it first came out, and to be honest, I would probably still recommend the Steam version even if the frame rate is locked, just because it has a more up-to-date build with a couple of improvements, and it's less prone to having some of the common bugs with Wine, but I'm still vibing with this first build. I paid for it, so I might as well use it. Now, this was pretty much the first official Hololive game released on PC. Now, there have actually been a couple of fan games here and there. A lot of them were published on itch.io, and a decent chunk of them can actually be played through the browser, so you don't even really need to install it and worry about the compatibility with Linux. However, I downloaded them anyway. I have a soft spot for Small Ame. It was one of the first Hololive fan games that I personally played, and running this on Linux was nothing special. Works perfectly fine. I decided to try out Mume no Toshi. Works perfectly fine, so much so that I just directly ran the executable without worrying about customizing the prefix. Holo Council Iris RPG, no complaints. One game that I actually had no idea even existed was Soda Game. The game works fine, and I'm interested in installing this on my Steam Deck because it's a pretty challenging game and it seems like something fun to exercise my brain while I'm taking the bus. Anyway, let's get back to talking about the official games. Aquarium. Now, this game came out a couple of months after it was initially released for consoles. I actually still have my PS4 digital copy that I never actually played because the game wasn't translated, but now it's on PC, which prompted me to repurchase it. And there are some issues. Right off the bat, this game during the main menu doesn't play the opening sequence in the background as it's intended. Now, if this was the only issue, that wouldn't even be the biggest deal in the world, but I have noticed that depending on the Proton version that you have installed, this could result in a crash during the beginning of Chapter 1. I know for a fact that Proton GE 8.26 will just crash unapologetically. GE 8.32 doesn't crash, the cutscene plays just fine, and as of writing the script, Proton Experimental also doesn't crash, but I have noticed that Proton GE 9.2 does actually play the cutscene during the main menu. There's no sound, but it does play. But when you actually try to load a save file, the game will just crash. Now, I wouldn't be able to tell exactly what caused this to happen, but what I will say is that in some instances, Proton Experimental sometimes introduces patches that were initially merged to Proton GE, so I don't know if whatever changes was done to Proton GE 9.2 might be merged to Proton Experimental, so for the time being, I'm just going to keep 8.32 just in case future updates break compatibility with this game. For the time being, the game is playable, but there definitely are some issues that need to be ironed out, especially because this is a visual novel. It's the perfect game to play on my Steam Deck, so I hope the notable issues get fixed over time. Now, if you're a part of Broke Gang, you don't want to use your lunch money to purchase video games, you can opt to play Hololive and Idle Showdown. The latter is a game that I've actually talked about in the past. If you've ever been mildly familiar with Hololive, you're probably very well aware of these games because their popularity branched beyond the fan community. Hololive has been played by the talent several times and even by other content creators outside of the Hololive group. It's an awesome game and one that's really easy to run. Even the most bare-bone crap top can run that. So not only is it free, it's also not so demanding that you need to spend money on a decent computer. So it's a pretty accessible game on so many levels. And unlike Hololive Error and Aquarium, Hololive has support for cloud saves. So yeah, no offense, but I kind of like being able to switch from my gaming PC and my Steam Deck without having to reset my progress. I say this because Aquarium will reset your progress sometimes even after reinstalling the game, which is insane to think about. And then there's Idle Showdown, a game that recently joined Holo Indies. I've been following this project for a while and it has garnered enough love and attention to become part of some FGC events, which makes me very happy. And the best thing about both these games is that they work crazy well on Linux. Idle Showdown initially had some odd performance issues with Proton and some known graphical bugs common with Unity games, but those issues have pretty much been ironed out and you can get a smooth experience playing this amazing 2D fighter. Now, let's say you're a part of Broke Gang, but you still want to spend at least some amount of money, support the cause as one might phrase it. Well, there is this one holo indie game called Holoparade that only costs €4. And something that I find to be really cool about a lot of these Hololive games is that even the ones that are commercially sold, they actually don't have any DRM. Except for Aquarium, that one does require the Steam API to be running, but the other ones you can literally run the executables without the Steam launcher. When it comes to the fan games, I think we all expected those ones to not have any DRM since they're not even being sold. But the fact that even Hololive Error and Holoparade just casually run without the Steam API is pretty awesome. You actually have ownership of those games. Now, there's one last game that I want to talk about, which is actually one that's technically still in beta, namely Hollow Earth. Now, this game has been a pain in the ass over the years to get it running on Linux. Just so you can understand, I have a separate build apart from one that I mainly use, and that second build pretty much exists as a hub for hypervisors, and that's because setting up Type 1 KVMs is a bit easier for me when I have a dedicated build instead of using the same one that I use to run my primary operating system, just to avoid having archaic display configurations and some other reasons that I won't bring up just because I don't want to waste any time. Regardless, I have a Windows 11 virtual machine, and for a long time, my main use case for this has been to test out Hollow Earth and keep up with any updates, because trying to get this game to work on Linux has been a nightmare. But it's actually no longer impossible. You see, at least for me, I had two problems. The first was that the game wouldn't even finish installing due to a failure while installing some libraries, and even when I was able to bypass the setbacks and somehow manage to install it, the game would just report that I had an unsupported graphic API. So at some point, my patience could no longer be tested any further after immense troubleshooting, so I just resorted to playing this game exclusively on Windows. It wasn't that big of a deal for me because I'm sure by the time you watch this video, Hollow Earth may already have some resemblance of content in it, but when I first installed this, a long time ago, this game had nothing. It was literally just an empty blue room, so it's not like I was going to spend that much time playing this. I just needed a couple of minutes to test the game out, see if there were any changes, and then log out. No skin off my back. But of course, that didn't mean that I didn't want this game to work on my actual Linux install. And after looking into this, I'm happy to report that you absolutely can get this game working on Linux, but there are a couple of conditions. Number one, you have to use the Flatpak version of Luchas in order to proceed. There are ways you can play this game without this, but in my testing, it has generally been easier to use Flatpak Luchas, and later I'll explain why. Number two, you will need to download the WineGE runner. Now, in case later versions break compatibility, For WineGE, you can use 8.26. Now, I will elaborate on this more later in the video, but what I can say for now is that for the initial installation of Hollow Earth, use WineGE. Now, I believe Vanilla Wine also is capable of installing this game, but you may run into problems later down the line at the end stages of the installation. With WineGE, on the other hand, I'm able to install the game from beginning to end. Now, one thing I will say, after you're done downloading the game using the Holo Launcher, I would actually recommend changing the default executable in the game options to the holoearth.exe located in the Hollow Earth apps Hollow Earth folder. The reason why I would advise doing this is for two reasons. A, it makes launching the game one step ahead, you don't need to go through the launcher first. But it's also because if you don't do this later on when you use Vanilla Wine, which I'll tell you right now, you will absolutely need it. And unfortunately, the Vanilla Wine built into Lutris doesn't seem to get along very well with the Holo Launcher. Now of course, you do need this launcher to update the game, so one solution I found is to download the Wine build distributed by Cron4ec using Proton Up Qt. And if you use this as the default runner, it does seem to be able to open the launcher. Now, here's where things get kind of wacky. If you try to open the game as it is, it will become practically unresponsive. You press any button on your keyboard, smash any area in the display with your mouse clicks, nothing. It has no effect. Now to fix this, you will need to create a folder called temp in the app data local folder. Now look, I don't want to spell out the full address path, just read the directory that I'll put on screen that you'll need to create. Following that, the game will in fact become responsive, but there are a couple of things worth noting. You see, the reason for why I recommend the Flatpak version of Lutris is that this game needs to log into your account in order to load your user profile. And for a long time, us Linux users were pretty much stuck in this step because for whatever reason, the game would just not load your default browser. You see, when it comes to Windows games and opening web links in-game, Linux has the solution called winebrowser.exe, which is basically a protocol that should automatically load any web URL using your computer's default browser, and the problem is that Hollow Earth just was not doing that. Now historically, the solution for this has been to essentially install the Windows version of Google Chrome inside the game's Wine prefix and then go to the Wine registry, which basically mimics the Windows registry system, and change the default application for running HTTP and HTTPS links to Google Chrome. However, personally speaking, I don't actually need to do any of that. For some reason, Flatpak Lutris does actually allow the game to open my default browser. I don't know what voodoo magic they pulled off that other Wine front ends aren't able to, but for whatever reason, I can. Now, I do want to note that I tested this in 4 different machines. My main one, my test VM, my laptop, and my Steam Deck. They all give the exact same result, but I also think it's important to note that all of those machines were running Arch Linux. Well, the Steam Deck has a fork of Arch Linux, but it still contributes to my main point, which is that I don't know if other distros would exhibit the exact same behavior. Now, last minute, just to be sure, I decided to create a Linux Mint VM, and after setting everything up and following the steps that I shared in this video, the end results seem to be the exact same. So we have 2 different distros, and they're both running different desktop environments. The only similarity between Linux Mint and my main computer is the fact that I was using the Flatpak version of Lutris. So if we're purely basing it off of my personal experience, it does seem like the Google Chrome workaround isn't needed anymore, but I might need to test this a bit more just to be sure. Now, I've been mentioning Vanilla Wine all throughout this video. Why can't I just use WineGE, you might ask? Well, you see, Hollow Earth has some pretty bad CPU bottlenecks when you use WineGE. So much so that entering the city lobbies, I'm running this game at like maximum 90 FPS at 1080p. Now, while this frame rate isn't by no means bad, at the same time, I'm running this game with a Ryzen 9 7900X and an RX 6900 XT. This frame rate is not normal for the hardware that I have. But if I use Vanilla Wine, I'm able to recoup so much performance because it utilizes less of my CPU. Although I will say that if you intend to play this game on a Steam Deck, you definitely do need the Wine build by Cron4ec, because that's the only one I'm able to get it launched on a Steam Deck. Aside from WineGE, which I definitely don't recommend using that runner. It will severely overload the CPU. Now, I do have one major bug to report. This game will fail to register my keyboard and mouse movements if I click out of the window. This isn't the first time I've seen this bug, and I have to assume it's related to Wine, because I recall Hololive Error having this exact bug when I played it using Wine, but under Proton this was never an issue. Hell, if I use WineGE, which is kind of like a customized version of Wine that integrates stuff from Proton GE, I'm actually able to tab out of the window and go back in without causing the game to become non-functional. So I might need to test this specific problem a bit more, because I do hope that one day I'll be able to pinpoint exactly what causes this and how to mitigate it. But at least for now, until WineGE is better optimized to run this game, just don't tab out. Other than that, I think that's pretty much all I have to highlight. I guess one last thing. While I was editing this video, Hollow Break actually came out. I remember even receiving the email and thinking to myself, oh shit, I guess I have to add one more game to the test list. And honestly, not that I thought I would have issues with this game, but I'm just gonna tell you right now, this game runs perfectly fine on Linux. No issues whatsoever. I've tried it out. Pretty much day one, it works. So yeah, Linux gaming is in a pretty good spot. I do want to note though that there are plenty of other Hololive fan games out there, so don't use this video as a closed case. Go out there and explore what the community has to offer. As for me, I got a lot of shit to do, but this has been pretty fun. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to share. Take care.